We'll start with a brief introduction. Luis Carlos Serrano Diaz is a groundwater modeler at the Alberta Geological Survey with over 7 years of professional experience in hydrogeology, fieldwork, data management, data analytics, petroleum geology, and geological and hydrogeological modeling. During his recent master's research at the University of Alberta, he focused on groundwater and surface water interactions, as well as actual evapotranspiration dynamics by integrating multiple data sets and implementing a physics-based model, i.e. HydroGeoSphere. He's passionate about advancing the understanding of groundwater surface water feedback through three-dimensional modeling techniques to address both scientific and practical challenges. In his free time, he finds joy in connecting with nature and history through hiking and travel. So thank you everyone for joining us today as we explore how actual evapotranspiration dynamics in the North Saskatchewan River Basin are influenced by groundwater and surface water contributions. Luis, I'll hand the mic over to you.
Thank you, Brian. So, hi everyone. Well, as Brian mentioned, I'm Luis Serrano, and my today's talk is related to my master's research. My today's presentation is assessing groundwater and surface water contribution to evapotranspiration in semi-arid watershed. So, it's well known that evapotranspiration plays a crucial role in the global hydrological cycle, significantly influencing the water balance in diverse ecohydrological regions, such as mountains, foothills, and plains. Additionally, in semi-arid regions of mid to high latitude zones of the world, the actual evapotranspiration can surpass the annual precipitation or substantially dominate other water balance components, so leading to potential impacts of the hydrologic budget, resulting in pressure on groundwater and surface water availability, and also increasing the risk of groundwater depletion. So there are a lot of studies that have researched spatiotemporal variation of actual evapotranspiration and potential changes due to climate change. However, the contribution of different water sources to the total actual evapotranspiration is not well understood. And this is the research gap that we wanted to address during my master. So before starting, I'm going to briefly explain what the components of the actual evapotranspiration are. So we can group in three main components. The first one is surface evaporation. That means the evaporation from water surface bodies such as rivers, lakes, ponds, or any kind of accumulation over the ground surface. The subsurface transpiration, that is the release of water vapor by plants drawing water from the root zone that is located in the subsurface domain, and plus the subsurface evaporation, that is the evaporation from water that is stored in the soils or the rocks. And regarding the resources to supply the actual evapotranspiration, we can consider that groundwater evapotranspiration is the water lost via subsurface evaporation and subsurface transpiration from the saturated zone, what is mean below the groundwater table. And we consider that surface water evapotranspiration is the water loss via evaporation, that could be surface water evaporation or surface evaporation, and the transpiration that occurs in the unsaturated zone that is above the groundwater table. So the main goal of my research was understand historical and future contribution of groundwater and surface water to watershed actual evapotranspiration in different ecohydrological regions of mid to high latitude basins. And to achieve this main goal, we work on three specific objectives. The first one was develop, calibrate, and validate a fully distributed process model base that allows the three-dimensional representation of groundwater, surface water interactions, and the hydrological balance, and in our case, we use HydroGeoSphere. The second one was predict groundwater evapotranspiration and surface water evapotranspiration across mountain, foothills, and plains. And last but not least, project and analyze changes of groundwater evapotranspiration and surface water evapotranspiration and their climate change scenarios. So our study area is the North Saskatchewan River Basin, and the North Saskatchewan River Basin, the stream flow is partially controlled by two dams, that is Big Ore Dam and Brazeau Dam. The elevation range varies more than 3,000 meters in the mountains to around 500 meters in the plains. For climate data, we use time series from stations, that is the triangles, and also we use grid climate datasets, that is the X basically here in the map. But in addition, we use geospatial datasets for the characterization of the surface and the subsurface domain. So for instance, for the surface domain, we use land cover, land use map, and also leaf area index datasets to better represent the leaf area index across the North Saskatchewan River Basin, and also, well, the overland zones. And for the subsurface domain, we utilize datasets related with soils and also with the three-dimensional representation of the geology in our study area. But why this watershed? Well, this study area has all the characteristics that we need to evaluate our objective that is located in Western Canada, where previous studies have estimated that over 70% of the mean annual precipitation is lost via actual evapotranspiration, so it's considered a semi-arid watershed. And the second is located in mid to high latitude regions, so it's considered sensitive to climate change as well. Last but not least, it has a diverse climate, land use, hydrogeological settings that we group in three ecohydrological regions, that is mountain, foothills, and plains. So our modeling workflow, well, our study period for the historical one is 1983 to 2013, and for the future is 2043 to 2073. And our workflow consists of 4 main stages. The first one, we provide all the input, such as several geospatial maps, climate, time series. And in the second one, we simulate the process related to the surface and subsurface water component of the actual evapotranspiration and more other hydrological process related with the in HydroGeoSphere. And the stage number 3, we perform the calibration and validation of the model using monthly stream flow data as well as monthly groundwater levels time series. And in stage number 4, we use the model prediction to analyze the actual evapotranspiration components and the sources and their historical and future climate change scenarios. So, given the poor availability of evapotranspiration data at a regional scale, our calibration is based on the best representation of the surface water flow and the groundwater flow. So for the surface water calibration, we use hydrometric station located in the mainstream of the North Saskatchewan River Basin. For instance, we have flow 48 that is mainly influenced by the gray polygon that is the mountains regions. And we have other stations located in the red polygons that represent the foothills. We have also one station in the North Saskatchewan River Basin in the plain area that is the gray polygon that is located in Edmonton City. So the simulation of the surface flow reproduces the seasonal variation. As you can see, in the best performance of the model was reached in foothills and plains. That is station, well, some example is station 45 and station 52 that is in foothills and plains. While the mountains, the performance was not the best. We compare with other models that have been developed in this area, and we found similar results. To calibrate the groundwater component, we use 64 groundwater observation wells from the GWET network, that is the groundwater observation well network from Alberta, and all of them are distributed in foothills and plains. And we can consider that our groundwater component is well calibrated with our R square is 0.98 and our mean absolute error in this regional model is around 9 meters. And also we have a well distribution of the groundwater table across the North Saskatchewan River Basin. So to begin with the big picture of the results for the historical period. So in this graph in the left map, we have the representation of the mean annual actual evapotranspiration across the North Saskatchewan River Basin. In the right panel, we have a violin graph that represents the spatial distribution of the mean annual evapotranspiration in the different ecohydrological regions. We have, sorry, the spatial is the historical distribution, the mean annual historical distribution of the actual evapotranspiration in the different regions. And according to our result, the foothills represent the highest annual actual evapotranspiration, followed by the plains and the mountains. Also we can see also those results spatially in the map. We can see the more like red and yellow colors are located in foothills, while followed by the plains that is more like green ones, and the mountains is like the blue ones. So, but now to better understand the annual total actual evapotranspiration, we have this graph grouped by season and region. So on the bottom of the graph, we have the regions and seasons. So we have here, and season 1 represent fall and winter, and season 2 represent spring and summer. On top of the graph, we have the corresponding total actual evapotranspiration in millimeters, and the y-axis represents the percentage of actual evapotranspiration. And the color represents the share of the component of the actual evapotranspiration. So the green one is the subsurface transpiration, the brown one is the subsurface evaporation, and the blue one is the surface water evaporation. So the take-home message here that is that across all ecohydrological regions, spring and summer season, that is number 2, has the highest contribution to the total annual actual evapotranspiration than fall and winter season. In addition, regardless of the season, ecohydrological regions dominated by permanent vegetation, like for instance, forests, that is the case of the foothills and mountains. Subsurface transpiration is the largest contribution of the actual evapotranspiration compared with the other components in both seasons, basically. So now I'm going to show how explicitly we analyze our results and how is the contribution from surface water to actual evapotranspiration and the groundwater to actual evapotranspiration. So in the map, we identified that the highest contribution of the two groups to the actual evapotranspiration is the surface water evapotranspiration. That is the map A. So we can see that the dominant color is the actual evapotranspiration. So we have this, the blue colors is less percentage of the total actual evapotranspiration is supplied by the surface water evapotranspiration, and the red color is more percentage of the total actual evapotranspiration is supplied by surface water evapotranspiration. So as you can see, across almost all the study area, we have like the dominant is the surface water evapotranspiration. However, we identify some regions where the groundwater evapotranspiration is the main component, and we found that the highest contribution of the groundwater evapotranspiration to actual evapotranspiration mainly occurs in riparian areas, as you can see in the map B, and also in the northeast of the plains. After analyzing our results, we found that the cause related to this occurrence is that a combination of shallow groundwater table, as you can see here in the map C, in the riparian areas, and also in the northeast of the plain, we have a shallow groundwater table. Also, the vegetation type with large root depth and also with large leaf area index. That is in this case, in the map D, we have the representation of the mean leaf area index that is located, the higher values are located in areas dominated by forests. That is the case on foothills, and also in the northeast of the plain, we have some forests. And also, is also like affected by a high potential evapotranspiration. So despite we have like similar conditions in the mountains, in the river valleys of the mountains, we have also forests in the river valleys of the mountains, because the potential evapotranspiration is really low in that area. Is not as relevant like in foothills that we have also similar vegetation, but the contribution from groundwater to actual evapotranspiration is not the same. So for discuss our future results, so in this slide, I'm going to show you the future conditions across the ecohydrological regions due to the climate change. So in the left column, I'm going to present the mean annual values for the historical period. In the middle column, I'm going to present the different and the SSP 126 scenario, that is the most considered the most optimistic scenario. In the right column, I'm going to present the difference between the historical period and the SSP 585 scenario that is considered like the most pessimistic scenario. So for precipitation, we found that it's projected a more pronounced rise in precipitation under the SSP 585 scenario. In addition, in mountains, is projected a most pronounced increase in precipitation, while in plains and foothills is expected around 3 times less increases in precipitation than the mountains. Regarding the temperature, we found that the hottest scenario is in SSP 585. In addition, well, foothills and plains has the highest temperature increases. And overall, the potential evapotranspiration is projected to increase across the North Saskatchewan River Basin, across all the ecohydrological regions. However, the smaller increase is projected under SSP 585, and this one is attributed due to a higher CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, so that produce also like reduction of the water consumption by the plants due to stomach gut closure. Moreover, in plains is projected the largest rise of the potential evapotranspiration, followed by the foothills and plains. And so these future conditions, and also, well, the increase of that produce an increase of the total annual actual evapotranspiration in the North Saskatchewan River Basin. So across the panels is going to be similar. In the left panel is the historical results, and the middle and the right is the difference between the both scenarios to the historical simulations. So what we found here is that across all the North Saskatchewan River Basin, the actual evapotranspiration is projected to increase around 20% under the SSP 126 scenario, and around 11% under SSP 585 scenario. However, in addition, we found that the share of contribution from the surface water evapotranspiration and groundwater evapotranspiration to actual evapotranspiration change under climate change scenarios. So again, in the left column, we present the mean annual historical result. In the middle and right column represent the difference between the future scenarios and the historical period. Particularly in riparian areas, in the map B and C, we can see that across all ecohydrological regions in this riparian area, we have like blue colors. And these blue colors basically represent a reduction of the contribution of the surface water evapotranspiration to the actual evapotranspiration, and also in the northeast of the plains. So these also these areas, exactly the same areas, but we can see an increase of groundwater evapotranspiration to the actual evapotranspiration. So there is also like a change here in the contribution to supply the total actual evapotranspiration. And also we found that future climate change scenarios and increases of the actual evapotranspiration results in groundwater table depletions, that is the map H and I. And we can see that, for instance, in these areas, in like is the warmer color represent deeper groundwater table, and the more like coldest color it represent like the shallow groundwater table. So in foothills and plains, the predominant is going to be like a depletion of the groundwater table, and this depletion also is affecting the areas where the root depths can use this resources in the saturate zone. So here, for instance, we have a depletion of the groundwater table, and this depletion of the groundwater table results in a reduction of the contribution of groundwater evapotranspiration to the actual evapotranspiration, and an increase in the surface water evapotranspiration to actual evapotranspiration. So also we found that this effect of the increases of the actual evapotranspiration that produce also a depletion of the groundwater table is mainly the more critical area is the plains areas, And despite we have like this fluctuation also affect like the groundwater table, we found groundwater table and the contribution from the groundwater resources to the actual evapotranspiration, that only occurs in areas that the root depths can reach this saturated zone. So for instance, in mountains, we have like a rise in the groundwater table, but we cannot really like see a change of the share of contribution on surface water and groundwater, and that's because the mountains area has a characteristic that is the groundwater table is deeper than the root zone, so for that reason cannot really provide groundwater resources to supply the actual evapotranspiration, despite there is some changes in that area as well. So in addition, we found that the groundwater table decreases under SSP 5A5 is partially mitigated by because we have a scenario that have higher precipitation, and also we have higher CO2 concentration that basically reduce the consumption by transpiration by the plants due to the stomach closure and their more elevated concentration of CO2, basically. So the main conclusion here is that more than 80% of the annual actual evapotranspiration across the ecohydrological regions occurs during spring and summer, and that is aligned with other studies as well. And that is also aligns with the increases in temperature, in potential evapotranspiration, and with the active plant growing season. And also that the water resources in the surface and the unsaturated zone, that is the surface water evapotranspiration, so represent the highest contribution to the mean annual actual evapotranspiration across all the ecohydrological regions. And the larger contribution of groundwater to actual evapotranspiration than surface water to actual evapotranspiration is driven by shallow groundwater table, vegetation types that have large root depths and leaf area index that is also connected with the saturated zone, and also higher potential evapotranspiration across the ecohydrological regions. And in areas influenced by groundwater discharge flows, like the riparian areas and the northeast of the plains, groundwater evapotranspiration represent a significant share of the annual actual evapotranspiration, that is more than 40%. And under climate change scenarios, groundwater is expected to play a more significant role to supply the actual evapotranspiration than the surface water in these specific areas, because we have like this like constant flow that is keep the water levels. Future climate change scenarios and actual evapotranspiration increases are likely to result in groundwater table fluctuations and the projected decline of the shallow groundwater table in areas where the plant root depths are connected with the saturated zone, decrease the groundwater evapotranspiration contribution to the actual evapotranspiration, and increase the surface water evapotranspiration contribution to the actual evapotranspiration. Conversely, groundwater table rise have the opposite effect. And our results suggest that considering both surface water and groundwater contribution to the actual evapotranspiration is important, as neglecting the groundwater component may result in poor understanding and considerable underestimations of actual evapotranspiration and the potential impacts of groundwater depletion. So the main cavitas and future direction as well. So main cavitas this is a regional study, so with an inherent cost resolution, so may result in constraints on the representation of the surface and subsurface processes. Also, the plant development here is mainly represented by two time variable components, that is the leaf area index and the root depth. Also, we didn't include like future changes of land use, land cover, like data sets or maps. So we don't have like this variation of also the plant types or the density of this one in the future climate change scenarios. So we didn't include groundwater pumping wells due to that requires a lot of detailed data and time series of the pumping rates, but currently is lacking of information. We also suggest that future studies incorporate a dynamic vegetation model that simulates biochemical process and plant adaptation to climate change conditions, or also simulate actual evapotranspiration dynamic in finer temporal and spatial scale that can provide a more reliable and comprehensive understanding of the actual evapotranspiration response and contribution from groundwater and surface water, because our settings include like monthly variations. So, but also in field studies, they have provided like the actual evapotranspiration can vary day by day, so or also hour by hour. So that's also to consider in future studies. So some acknowledgement is basically I want to say thank you to my supervisors, Monire, Brian, and Dan, and also different institutions that I received support, also data like ECHO, AER, AGS, North Saskatchewan Watershed Alliance, for sure Aquanti with the support, and last but not least also the family and friends that is part of this journey, and different funding resources. So I think we can also like continue with the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of questions coming in, Luis.
Okay.
So we'll try to get to everyone. We have about I think 24 minutes before Luis has to move on. So let's get started. There's a lot of them. I'll just try to maybe we'll start with some of the easier ones. So the first question is how you landed on the 2043 to 2073 time period for your future climate projections. Was this based on some guideline or just maybe a convenient time period?
It's basically because to include some variation in the leaf area index, because the leaf area index basically is, there are studies that demonstrate that the leaf area index is going to change in the future, but because we don't have like this data specifically, we use another model that was created in SWET that they also like simulate the changes in leaf area index according to the climate conditions, and using that outputs of that model, we calculate like the delta values, and these delta changes of the leaf area index, we use that data set to our model in order to also to include our future leaf area indexes. And why this, like we are starting like 3 years later of a decade or something, it's just because in the outputs from this specific model, they require like 3 years of warming up period in SWET basically. So the outputs is starting 3 years later. So for that reason, we use like that like period from 2043, or also the historically starting 2023.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, so here's a question that seems very popular. So could you explain the process you used a little bit to calibrate your model? Were you doing modeling or your calibration manually or using PEST? How did you perform
that's a good question.
Analysis?
Yeah, that's a good question. So first, the approach that we use is basically one of the recommended by Aquanti in a paper that basically is like 3 stages. No, the first stage is basically use like a yearly average of precipitation and potential evapotranspiration. Well, basically average annual, and repeat the cycle until trying to find like it's like a steady solution, because we are using variable saturation. So for that reason, we cannot just use like the common steady state. And then we proceed with that pseudo steady stage that is using like average monthly variations of the, again, leaf area index, all the inputs basically, the climate data sets as well, also like how the root depths and or like time variation parameters. So then we repeat like this yearly cycle for many simulations until find like a stable solution. And then we proceed with the transient. In the transient, we select 5 years of the calibration. And for these 5 years, we started to work with the parameters. Initially, we wanted to use PES. However, well, this is part of the limitation when you are working in a regional model with a lot of elements and nodes. So the PES takes a lot of time to run just one single run. For instance, in our case, our model takes just for running 5 years more than 2 days. Just for run, and we are running like 30 years of the historical period, and then 5 climate change models with 30 years of each of them for each scenario. So it was quite complex. Yeah, but for the calibration, basically, it was because of the time consuming and the we couldn't use PES. So we have to work with manual calibration. And in the manual calibration, the approach was trying to identify the more sensitive parameters. And according to that more sensitive parameter, work with that to avoid to start working with all of them. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Luis. Okay, there's two questions here that I think you could probably answer at once. They're generally related to basic description of how HydroGeoSphere works. So I'll just quickly note before you answer that if anybody has any questions about HydroGeoSphere, of course, they're more than welcome to reach out to Aquanti, and we can clarify if there's any ambiguity about this. So it's kind of a two-part question, or two questions that I think you could probably answer at once. The first is, how do you differentiate the groundwater evapotranspiration and surface water evapotranspiration? Can we quantify them? So I think that is sort of related to, again, the background sort of structure of an HGS model. And then the follow-up, which is similar, is could you explain how the connection between groundwater and surface water is represented in your model?
Yeah, sure. Well, the first one basically for the Aquanti model and HydroGeoSphere model, basically for each node, you have also one result of basically of the process itself of the hydrological balance as well. So basically for each node, we have the subsurface evaporation, the subsurface transpiration, and the surface evaporation. Well, the surface evaporation just occurring in the surface, but it's going to be report zero in the deeper layers. So, but also the HydroGeoSphere model simulate the variation of the groundwater table in variable saturated and saturated areas. So we have, based on Richard equation, we have also this simulation. And if we have both components, we know what is the saturated zone for each time step. And we have also the contribution of different components of the actual evapotranspiration. So after processing the three-dimensional results, because we have to process all the three-dimensional results and the nodes that we have, we can identify if that actual evapotranspiration occurs above or below the groundwater table. So according to those results, we can also separate and say, this one is groundwater contribution and the other one is surface water contribution. So that was basically the way that we found to extract that information, because initially it's not reported, but the outputs are there. After the processing of the output, you can again calculate what is the contribution from both components. And the other component, the other question is related how is connected the surface water and groundwater. So yeah, well, this model is one of the strongest one in this part, because basically it simulates the whole terrestrial water cycle in just one single model. So it solves the surface equation and the subsurface equation in one single code, and for each time step. So basically it's simulating the runoff, the infiltration, also the exfiltration or the actual evapotranspiration. So it's everything in one single code. It's not like other approach that connect like different software with different resolutions. So for that reason, requires more time to solve the questions. But basically for the unsaturated zone, this model use Richard equations, and also for the actual evapotranspiration use Kirstensen and Jensen, and also Allen. Well, it's like based on those ones, and also for the surface water also use Sine-Beinan. Sorry, the pronunciation is not the proper one. Sine-Beinan equations, and so it's based on also like Manning coefficient. So it's a lot of parameters that you have to work, but at the end, everything is simulated in just one single code. So this interaction is provided for each time state that you simulate.
Okay, thank you. There's a lot of questions to come through here. So I think there's an interesting series of questions here. Flows in downstream, the downstream area are regulated. Did you use naturalized flows for calibration and validation?
calibration and validation we use in general. Yeah, because yeah, not really, yeah, that was the approach.
Okay. And then regarding future scenarios, how many different climate scenarios were employed into HGS for each SSP or shared socioeconomic pathway?
Yeah, we use 5 of them. And then after simulate 5 for each SSP scenario, we get like all the results of the multiple simulation, and then we average the simulation. Is a common approach when you are simulating climate change scenarios in order to have like an average response, because between the different climate change models, you have a huge range. So in order trying to reduce the uncertainty of the different models, so we use like the average response in a HydroGeoSphere for the different outputs. So we have to post-process as well that information.
Excellent. Okay, so for this next question, I think it will cover, there's been a few different questions sort of in this realm of questioning, but the results that you presented represent, it seems, ensemble means. This is what you just explained. But there's questions about how these mean results may compare to more extreme scenarios, such as periods of flood or periods of extreme drought. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, basically, we also discussed that in our, well, it's like for future direction, basically, also because, yeah, the strings could be completely different. We are using like more the assembling one and more the average response. But yeah, we didn't analyze that specifically, but we discussed that with our supervisor. That could be also for future direction, simulate the strings and check how it basically respond this specific area, and also, well, the model.
Excellent. Okay, here's an interesting question. So from Brampton, he asks that he mentions that he's done similar studies in arid polar regions. Can you speak more to some of the drying changes that you're seeing in these regions? Does the water balance suggest the region is drying just because evapotranspiration is changing? If precipitation is increasing, etc., it doesn't necessarily mean that the region is drying overall.
Yeah. Basically, well, here there are some considerations that, and also some discussion that we are going to publish. We have submitted the paper to the Journal of Hydrology. Hopefully in a couple of months, or in some months, we can get already to publish paper. But yeah, here we are assuming, for instance, there is no like groundwater pumping wells, for instance, or something that can be like also like affect the system, so stress the system itself. But in general, this groundwater drop is generated just for the climate conditions that we are going to represent. It's possible to affect this study area. So it's just the natural response of the water cycle, and because we have like this really dry area in the North Saskatchewan River Basin. So we can see that the changes in the climate also is going to affect the actual evapotranspiration, and this increase of the actual evapotranspiration is basically reduce the amount of water that is going to infiltrate and reach the saturation zone. So for that reason, we have like this depletion. Yeah, but depending on the additional effects or additional for instance anthropogenic characteristic, this could be higher or could be less depending on what kind of measure the human is going to take to avoid that. No, and also, well, all the models have a big uncertainty, so it's part of the modeling part specific and more in climate change. No, so for instance, the new version of the model, they are trying to also implement changes of vegetation specifically. So that's is going to be better representation in future studies. But in order to also to like try to include like how the vegetation is respond to the future climate condition, we use also like we calculate the potential evapotranspiration using SWET, and because in SWET you can also like include how is the CO2 concentrations, and this concentration is also reduce the potential evapotranspiration, and at the end also reduce the actual evapotranspiration. So for that reason, in the most drastic scenario, we have less increases in actual evapotranspiration, but still there are increases. So yeah, we are representing more the natural cycle here.
Excellent. Okay, I think I'll maybe ask 2 more questions from the chat, and then we can maybe call it quits. But here we have one that's regarding the modeled period, except instead of the future climate scenarios, it's about the historical, this historical period. So yeah. Regarding the 30-year historical modeling period, can you repeat what period was used? And I don't think it necessarily matches with the recommended climate change projection of 1981 to 2010. Could you maybe discuss why you chose the period that you did?
Yeah, we chose the for the historical was 1983 to 2013, so it's 30 years basically of data. This is the recommended period for check what is the trend or the changes for evaluate the average response of the models at least 30 years. So, and why this specific period? Because again, we have the potential evapotranspiration was calculated in SWET. So, and this was from a previous model. So that is not starting in 1980 because yeah, it requires like 3 years of warming period. So for that reason, it's starting in 83. Because that information was available from a colleague in the lab. So we use that information because also we didn't like, I didn't do the downscaling process as well and that kind of thing. So we use information that requires a lot of time to processing and downscaling, and that from a previous study in the same area in the same North Saskatchewan River Basin.
Great. Now, the last question, I may be cherry picking this one because it's more focused on HydroGeoSphere, but we have a question here about what was the main challenge that you faced when developing the model? For example, how did you deal with aquifer heterogeneity? But also just an opportunity to talk about any other challenges you faced.
Yeah, was multiple challenges basically because initially we wanted to represent many details, but yeah, when you are simulating surface water and groundwater in just one single code, it requires a lot of time to solve all the questions. So at the end, we have to work with the mesh, for instance. So we have to refine the mesh just in the more important areas for our studies. So in our case, we refine the mesh in the river zones in order to better reproduce like the shape of the valleys, in order to promote the water going and basically going to the stream flows, and can like have also guarantee that is always in the rivers is a downstream gradient. So that kind of processing the mesh and also the DEM, that was like one of the initial problem that we face. So we have to solve that like processing, reducing the number of nodes in different areas that is more like flats. So, or we don't have like these like big changes. And so in order to reduce the nodes and reduce the simulation time, because initially it was like 5 times more nodes that we have in this model, so we couldn't run the model itself. And then we use hydrostratigraphic units to represent the geology, but we also like create zones by polygons in order to represent some heterogeneous properties, specifically in soils, for instance. So for soils, we use just we use like 4 layers to represent the soils, But these 4 layers, in order to represent how it's changing the properties, we use like polygons. So that was the most challenging, that try to balance your 3D mesh, what you want to simulate, and also trying to have like the best performance of the model as well. So it was like challenging that part. In addition, in the calibration also, because we have to run multiple models with different settings and checking multiple results and checking what was like the best response. Basically, yeah, it was like more like a lot of models, a lot of results, and post-processing that information to check if it is responding or not to the changes in these parameters. For this, the range of parameters have to be like a physical sense. It's not something weird or something based on literature review. So, but yeah, in general, I think that the number of layers that you use and the number of nodes and also the processing of the inputs to have a better response of the model. That was the most challenging part, I would say. That
Common
also depends on,
challenges.
yeah, sorry, that also depends on your conceptual model, no? So we work a lot in the conceptual model, a lot, and try to represent the most important ones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very common challenges for HydroGeoSphere users, just dealing with a lot of data on the input side and the output side. And it's always an uphill struggle against model runtimes. Okay, I know there's several questions in here that we don't have time to get to today. I apologize for that, but with Luis's permission, I'll maybe CC you on my follow-up emails, and so if any of the attendees have questions, they'll be able to reach out to you. Luis, thank you very much for taking the time today. It was very interesting research and great to hear about your master's project. Hopefully, we'll be hearing more from you soon with a lot of great HGS research into the future.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.